Hello everybody, welcome to another update on the Stock Screener. Today we are going to talk about price ceilings on oil because that's the new trend geopolitically, and it's important to understand this because it will decide where oil is going to go and what the economy will be doing. So recently they were trying to pressure the Kremlin, and that's the G7. They wanted to put an oil price cap on Russian oil. And why are they doing this? They want to weaken Russia, because if you can't sell oil, then you will have less funds. Okay. And I will illustrate this with the demand and supply curve. And this will effectively weaken Russia. But of course, this is not good for the economy. In aggregate, everyone loses. That will be explained as well. Other than this, we also see price caps on gasoline in certain countries. They want to protect the consumer, and it helps. If you reduce the oil price, then consumers will have to pay less for the oil, and yep, they benefit from it. But of course, the producers don't benefit from this. And this is important to understand as well. So let's go over the supply and demand curve. As you know, there are two curves on here. The demand curve, that's this line. So let's say the oil price goes down, then that means people will buy more oil. So the quantity increases. For the supply curve, when oil goes up in price, then producers can produce more oil, because the higher the oil price, the higher the production. Okay? And there is one equilibrium price, that's this point here, and that's currently at $100 per barrel. So now they are going to put a price cap on Russian oil. So let's say they're capping the price at, let's put a number here, 50. It's an easy number. So what happens? Legally, you cannot sell oil at higher than $50 right now. So we are getting two equilibrium points, this one and this one. So which one is it? Let's take this one first. If the price of oil goes to 50, that means that I will buy more oil because it's cheap. So from the perspective of the consumer, this is very good. I will buy more. Okay. But from the perspective of the producer, this will be a problem because it's too cheap, that oil. So I won't be able to produce that quantity. So this point is not viable from the perspective of the producer. Okay? So this is a dream. This will never come true. So it must be this equilibrium point. So at this point, the consumer will say, okay, I will buy this oil at $50, but less quantity. It's okay for me. It's still better than the $100. And from the perspective of the supplier, this is also okay because they can produce this amount of quantity for $50. So let's take a look at this equilibrium point. Okay, this equilibrium point will bring us a consumer surplus and a producer surplus. Okay, so what is the consumer surplus and producer surplus? Consumer surplus is the value that the consumer gets, and producer surplus is the value that the producer gets. In the beginning, at this point, we had a consumer surplus of this area, this triangle. This was the value that the consumer gets. And from the producer perspective, this triangle was the value of the producer. So both consumer and producer were benefiting from capitalism. And this whole triangle, this big triangle here, was the value that's been created for both consumer and producer. But now, with this new price ceiling here at 50, we shifted the curve to the left, okay? We shifted it to the left, and now the producer surplus has shrunk to this small triangle, okay? So we have a smaller producer surplus. And what's the consumer surplus? The new consumer surplus is this area here. This rectangle, triangle thing here, trapezium. Okay, this seems bigger than the triangle here. So the consumer is actually benefiting from the price cap. But the producer is not benefiting from this. Now there's a limit to this because you can keep on reducing the price ceiling. You can keep on reducing this, right? But there will be a limit to this price ceiling because at some point this surplus is tiny, so the supplier is just going bankrupt and the consumer will not be able to buy any oil at any price because at the price of $20 oil, the producers won't be producing any oil and the consumer won't be able to buy any oil. So this is going to be a very big problem if these G7 countries put the oil price too low. They put this oil price at, for example, $20, then yeah, there won't be any oil produced. So this area is going to diminish and go to zero. So this is the risk that the G7 is taking. If they put it too low, they are going to induce a recession. And why is that? Because this was the equilibrium point earlier with this quantity, but with these price ceilings, they are bringing the quantity to the left. So there's less oil available, which means less GDP, which means a recession is induced. So that's what's going to happen. Now, this is, of course, only for Russia. If they do this globally, then we have a certain recession. But now they are doing this only to Russia. So all those consumers will probably stop buying from Russia, but start buying ex-Russia, outside of Russia. So that means the oil price will probably increase outside of Russia and decrease inside of Russia. Okay, so that was our small analysis. So what is the conclusion now? When you do these price ceilings, you will increase inefficiency in the economy. And that will result in recession because less oil is produced, and inflation because they will probably print the heck out of this. Second, oil will drop in Russia and will rise outside of Russia because the consumer needs oil and will get it anywhere else than Russia. And the final conclusion is that in aggregate, nobody wins. Why does nobody win? Because when you look at this curve here, in the beginning we had this big triangle, which is the total value due to capitalism. But then they shifted the curve to the left due to the price ceiling. And then we have this small triangle that is actually lost. We call this debt weight loss. So this is actually lost in the economy due to inefficiencies. And some of the surplus went to the consumer, and a lot of surplus has been lost for the producer. But in aggregate, so nobody wins. So it's very important to know these dynamics because it will determine the oil price and also determine the outlook for the economy, which is probably recessionary. That was what I wanted to talk about in this episode. So think about it, and I'll see you in the next video.